Hi, I'm Carrie.
And I'm Kayla, and you're listening to the Cheat Sheet Speech Podcast, where two pediatric speech-language pathologists talk about how to build communication in your everyday routines.
Yeah, a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. If you're concerned about your child's speech and or language, please seek an evaluation with a speech-language pathologist that is licensed in your state.
All right, Carrie, so what are we chatting about today?
So you know how they say no elbows at the table? Well, this generation of parents is now saying no screens at the table. It's a new trend parents are calling restaurant training.
Right, I saw this article in the New York Post, and it was referring to this TikTok trend called restaurant training that you were talking about, but I hadn't heard of it before I read the article.
Yeah, well, apparently it's what a lot of parents are talking about. So if you've ever seen toddlers glued to their tablets at the table and you're trying to avoid this, then this episode is for you. So let's first start with, what is restaurant training?
According to the article, which we will link in our comments, restaurant training is a movement where parents intentionally avoid using tablets or phones to keep kids occupied at restaurants. Instead, they foster in-person conversation and manners. It's all about stepping away from those like zombie tablet behaviors, which they call them in the article.
Right. So restaurant training is this movement to shift away from having iPads at the table when you're going out to eat.
Yes, and I've definitely seen families where all of the children at the table have iPads, but I think it's important to note there is another side of this debate. Many families are posting their own videos and TikToks in sort of a retaliation or against this movement to inform people about maybe why they would use iPads at the table.
Yes, I've seen a couple of these TikTok posts as well. There's one like a father is holding the daughter and she's super wiggly and like running around the restaurant. And like the caption was something like, we don't have iPads, but you won't stop staring at our kid making noise at the table. Something like that.
Yeah, and it's just because like families can feel overwhelmed by the social pressures of being in a public environment. You don't want the meltdown to last that long. And screens can often be the most reliable source of entertainment for them.
Yes, yeah. And I think it's important to emphasize you need to do what's best for your family. There's no right or wrong way to approach eating out with your family. We do have a whole podcast episode just on screen time, and that kind of talks about the impact of screen time on language, if you're curious to learn more about that. And then it also just discusses some tips for reducing screen time or making that screen time more purposeful.
Yes, so definitely check out that episode on screen time if you're interested in learning more about how to make screen time purposeful. But some of those strategies can apply to this episode as well.
Yeah, so let's take a deeper dive into this article. Why are parents restaurant training? So what makes them so interested in this restaurant training?
So in the article, Jamie Boxer, a speech-language pathologist and co-creator of Table for Tots in Brooklyn, stated if kids learn how to enjoy an outing without screens at early ages, they'll know how to talk and connect in person as they get older.
Okay, so yeah, parents are kind of looking to build that social connection, social communication at meal times, which, eating is a very social experience. As adults, we often meet our friends for coffee or go out to dinners, or a lot of first dates are going out to dinner.
Right, exactly. So parents want to set their child up for success by starting to build those skills earlier on. According to this article, parents are also worried about missing out on time with their kids.
Okay.
So 2/3 of the adults polled feared that they are missing out on precious moments with their minis due to screen time addictions.
Meal times can be the only time throughout the day that all the family members are together. So I could see that parents are worried about not taking advantage of that time that they're all together and can build those connections.
Right. And lastly, parents are also worried about creating iPad kids. And like we mentioned before, stopping that zombie tablet behavior where they're using these iPads to be like a crutch or a babysitter to help their child stay calm during the dinner, and they want to try to move away from that.
Okay. Yeah. As we had kind of discussed in that screen time episode, that screens are very addictive, just the way they're built to engage and keep your attention. So they can be very difficult to transition away from. So if you are very dependent on screens for that regulation piece, it can make it hard to regulate in a situation where you don't have access to a screen. So like, let's say you like forgot to bring the iPad to dinner one time, that could cause some dysregulation.
That's very true. That's a really good point. So parents interested in this restaurant training movement are looking to reduce their child's dependency on the screens. And then they're looking to increase social communication and then also create stronger connections with their children.
Awesome. Yeah. And again, there's no right way to approach meal times. You have to do what's best for your family. For the purposes of this podcast, we're going to dive into how to build communication at a restaurant without screens and how to use language to help support that regulation across the dining experience.
Yeah, I think that's great. Let's dive into that. Eating is such a social experience, like we mentioned before, which is great because it provides a lot of opportunities to build language. And so you want to take advantage of this time to support your child's communication. So if we start from the beginning, you want to go out to dinner on a Friday night with your family. What should we be doing to prepare earlier in the week?
Great. Yeah. I mean, I love that you're already thinking about that dining experience on, Monday or whatever day at the beginning of the week. As we've mentioned in previous podcasts, children are experiencing the world for the first time. So we have to remember that they're still like learning about how these activities work, and they might not have context for what to expect at the restaurant.
That's true. They might not be able to picture like what a restaurant is when you say it or have the vocabulary. Like restaurant is a pretty complex word. Same with like menu, waiter, waitress. These are all vocabulary words that could be a little complex to them.
Right. So it's important to teach the child about the restaurant, help them visualize it. So this could look like reading a book about going to a restaurant or printing out core vocabulary words for a restaurant. Actually, you can search, I've done this before, like restaurant communication board. You can do it for a lot of different themes on Google. And then there's picture boards that have different pictures, so in this case of a restaurant, it would have food items, utensils, and then like maybe, what do you want to eat? Like little questions on that picture board to help visualize it.
Oh, I love that. I feel like that's super good advice. It's just an easy way to present your child with a visual of what they might want to communicate, and also printing out even like a visual schedule of the order of events that would happen at a restaurant could be super helpful. So then let's say you're doing some pretend play, you could recreate the restaurant environment, have a waiter, practice ordering, maybe also weave in some expectations. Like if you have a doll or a stuffed animal that you're doing pretend play with, have them, talk at a quieter volume to the person next to them, or also practicing ordering.
Right. I love the idea of making a visual schedule and practicing eating at a restaurant, even just practicing sitting for a longer period of time. Everyone's dinner looks different at home. So you might not be sitting at the table for a long time when you eat at home. This could be that first experience of just sitting for a longer period of time. So just even practicing something as simple as that, many families kind of eat at different rates. So I would also just print out the menu of the restaurant you're going to. I know that a lot of people look at the menu or look up, the menu on Instagram. We do that as adults just to reduce our anxiety about like, what am I going to order when I get to that restaurant? Same thing for kids. That will reduce the anxiety around the pressure of like maybe ordering quickly or food preferences, especially they're, not readers yet, you can start to pair that with some pictures and they can see what they might want to order.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And also, just for anyone who is maybe more of a pickier eater, like you said, it's going to just set yourself up for a little bit more success previewing that menu. And also, many families really do eat on the go. So practicing those breaks, like you mentioned, if you are sitting for a long time, asking for the break, it's a really good way for your child to start to build autonomy over what their own body needs, and practicing what that break could look like in a restaurant, because it might not be able to look the same everywhere you go. And so you might have to figure something out for the restaurant setting.
That's a really good point. I love that. So we kind of previewed that restaurant, before we get there through those visuals and pretend play. What else could we be doing before that dinner reservation on Friday?
So if your child hasn't been to a restaurant before, I would start with some gradual exposure. So maybe going to a shorter period of time outing, which would be a coffee shop, or sitting at their own dinner table for a little bit longer, but maybe setting it up to seem more like a restaurant as opposed to your regular meal.
I love that. A little practice run.
Yeah. And I would also even just get your child involved in this experience, because it's pretty fun and kids start to act out some of those experiences in their everyday life. So especially when children don't have control over their schedules or experiences, this can also give them, again, more autonomy, because they get to kind of be in charge of what's going on.
I like that. So what could be an example of getting them more involved?
So not only having them practice some of those play things, I'd also want them to pick out some of the toys that they could bring to the restaurant. So maybe picking out their 3 favorite toys and putting them in a restaurant bag. Cute. Or maybe going with them to a store and having them pick out a toy that they get to bring. So earlier that day, we're going to a restaurant, let's pick out a toy for the restaurant that you'll bring.
Smart. And that's going to get them excited about going to the restaurant. And then you can even take that visual schedule that you had and toss that into the restaurant bag.
Yes, it gives them something to look forward to. So now they're starting to picture this restaurant because we've talked about it, and we've also kind of practiced what to expect. We packed our bags, so we're excited, we're ready to go. Can you talk about maybe what we would do 1 or 2 hours before the restaurant to make that transition a little bit smoother?
Yes. Yeah. So, it's right before that reservation. Any time that we might be sitting for a longer period of time, it can be beneficial to try to get some more sensory input before. Quick shout out to our occupational therapy friends. But that regulation piece and communication piece are just so important together. So it's definitely necessary that we utilize these tools at the same time. This is going to look different for every child, but this could be, maybe going to the playground and swinging before dinner. Or I love heavy work, so pushing a laundry basket with blocks in them, or pushing against the wall, anything to help with that regulation piece so that their body can feel more regulated before the restaurant, before we have to sit for a long period of time.
Yeah, that's an amazing idea. A really good point that you want to set them up for success for that longer period of sitting. So now let's say we are at the restaurant and we feel prepared, maybe a little nervous. What are some of the considerations to make when we're going to a restaurant?
Yeah, so I think first, just being conscious of the noise level and the environment in general. So the high chair might look or feel different than your high chair at home. Are there footrests on this high chair? Does your high chair at home have footrests? Does your child have a lot of space between them and the outside of the chair? In feeding therapy, we work a lot on body positioning. We sometimes will roll up towels and stick them in the sides of high chairs just to support that trunk control, and that will also help with regulation. So just some things to consider when you're going to be in a new environment.
Yes, that's a good point. Talking about the chair, also like which way the chair is facing. Is it facing the restaurant with all the other people? Or are you facing towards the wall where people are passing behind your child? And that preference is going to really depend on the child. Sometimes a child likes reduced distractions because things might be overstimulating, but sometimes the distractions could be good too to put less pressure on them. So just being mindful that like even chair positioning can be a big difference.
Right. There are a lot of variables that go into being in a new space. So, for example, you might want to bring headphones if it's a particularly loud restaurant or there's live music there, things to just be thinking about when you get to the restaurant.
Exactly. We just want to set their body up for success, support that regulation. And like we mentioned, it's a really great opportunity for building language. So, how might you foster communication across the meal?
Great question. So this will depend on your child's current communication modality. So it's going to look different for each child. But for a child who might be building vocabulary and language structures, start with modeling. Talk about what you see on the menu. I see chicken, yummy chicken. I like chicken. Or what you kind of see in the restaurant around you. I have water. It's cold. I see a waiter. I see the menu. This will just build attention to the vocabulary across your child's environment, which will help them build connections to the vocabulary and just the objects around them.
I love that. You could even sing like songs together, make up a song about the food. For some of our communicators that are working on some more complex language structures, you could do like an I spy with like object function, or you could also like go around and build a story with the different food items too. Yeah. Everyone says like a word or a sentence. There's ways to get everyone involved.
I love that. Yeah, creating a story will help practice build those complex language structures. Asking open questions that can generate conversation. It's also important to note that some children do have a harder time with those broader questions. So try asking an open-ended question that's still specific, or you can then offer a choice if your child needs support with those open-ended questions. So for example, instead of saying the dreaded, "How was your day?" try, "What was something that made you laugh at school today?" Or, "Did anybody get hurt at school today?" I asked a friend that the other day, and he did tell me his friend, got hurt on the playground. So something that could just draw some more specific language there.
Right. Yeah. Thinking of some of these kids who would be answering that "How was your day?" question, it can be really daunting. It's easy to just say good because that's a go-to. So those are great ideas to instead build more communication across the meal, bringing it back to the article, trying to make those connections and make purposeful moments out of our time together at the restaurant. And this is also a great time. Bring out the toys, play together,
right?
Have the visual schedule, especially during those waiting periods, to point out where you are in the meal. Take off the parts of the dining that you've already experienced.
Yeah, going through the schedule can just create a sense of time, especially sometimes that period between ordering and getting the food can feel long. So if they can start to see where they are on that visual schedule, that will help just conceptualize the time that they have left.
Yes. And also speaking of like the overall time can be kind of hard, that's also a great time to implement a break. Scheduling breaks into a meal is going to, again, help that regulation piece that we keep referring to, which is just going to be preventative of those breakdowns during the meal when a child's body might start getting tired or really wiggly.
Smart. I didn't think about that. So what might this break look like at a restaurant?
Well, you could take like a walk outside the restaurant if that's possible. You could even like push against a wall to get some more of that input as well. Maybe it's just that your child has to get out of the high chair and give them some squeezes or pressure, some hugs.
I love that. Setting those intentional breaks will create those smaller chunks of time. of having them just like sitting at that table, especially if they're still working on building up that amount of time that they can sit and feel regulated.
Right, because like even as adults, we get really antsy sitting at a table. We start to look around. You can tell when the timing is off at a restaurant, right? So just setting yourself up for success to have some of those breaks implemented is a great way to just be a little bit more prepared. So hopefully we survived the meal, right? We made it through. We're at the end. What could we do after the mealtime experience to support carryover to the next communication experience?
Reflecting on your experience at the restaurant creates an opportunity to review the language that you used during the restaurant. So this might look like modeling sentences. So I saw you eating dinner with your fork. I liked your story about a unicorn at the restaurant. Can you tell me that story again? That's great to practice, story recall or summarizing, or make a social story and draw what happened at the restaurant.
Oh, that's super cute. I love that idea. And then this child can like refer back to the story or even the drawing before the next restaurant experience, or to tell somebody else about their restaurant experience.
Right. Creating carryover of those vocabulary words beyond the restaurant. That's called generalization. We want to generalize those skills to other areas. All right. So that was a really great conversation about setting ourselves up for success at a restaurant so we can take advantage of those language opportunities that arise at a meal together. Let's move on to our speech spotlight.
Our speech spotlight this week is about the concept of time, which we kind of referred to back in the restaurant chatter when we were talking about sustained attention, this idea of going somewhere later, and waiting.
Right. Restaurants involve many of these skills related to time, but how much do toddlers actually understand about time?
Well, I often hear parents say, 5 more minutes. And then after the 5 minutes, the child melts down anyways. So it turns out that your toddler's brain doesn't actually conceptualize time like this yet. So you're not really setting yourself up for success.
That's exactly right. Your toddler doesn't know 5 more minutes, doesn't know what that means. So what should I say instead of 5 more minutes? Well, first, let's split this idea of time up into two concepts. So understanding that duration of time versus how long they can wait. Meaning, do they comprehend when something will happen versus do they have that regulation and attention skills of waiting?
That's a really good point. There's a difference between duration versus just being able to wait. So for duration, Brandon and colleagues reported that children ages 10 to 12 months can anticipate the timing of repeated events. Think about like a toy that pops up every 5 seconds. So they're starting to kind of expect when something's going to happen.
Okay, so for example, that would be anticipating you saying boo after about like 3 seconds. I've said pika, boo. They're anticipating that that's going to come after a couple seconds. They're waiting for that.
Right, exposure to that routine. So around this time, they can wait about 15 to 30 seconds with a distraction. And then by 18 to 24 months, that increases to 1 to 2 minutes. And according to Vaughn and colleagues, that's according to Vaughn and colleagues. However, this success with waiting really depends on something being very interesting, having distractions, and that body being regulated.
Okay, so still a small amount of wait time, and it's really not that independent yet because it includes having those high interest toys and distractions.
Right, exactly. So the little ones are still building their independence with these waiting skills at those ages. And if we move on to a little bit older toddlers, Friedman said that they can anticipate events happening like in the immediate future. So we're thinking minutes. but they struggle with thinking about like something hours or days. So if you say we're going to the pool later, many children might interpret this as to be more like a now or immediately when they're around 2 to 3 years old.
Yes, I have kids all the time who tell me that they're going to Disney today, and then I find out, it's in January. So that's definitely tracks there. So giving your child, your 2 to 3 year old, maybe a more of a concrete description of when you're leaving. So first lunch, then pool, that would probably be more helpful in your pool situation rather than just saying we're going to the pool later.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The first then is going to be a little bit better. And Clark mentions this, that children at around 2.5 to 3 years can actually follow those first then commands that are familiar and they're paired with a routine that they know. So like first wash your hands, then eat. So that would be just a much better way to approach your child with this time concept.
Okay, so how long can my toddler actually wait at this age?
So at around 2, children can often delay their gratification for up to 1 to 2 minutes, again, with adult support. So that basically means that children can wait briefly if they know that there's like a reward coming, but it's really limited to that 1 to 2 minutes.
So this is kind of referring to those, classic videos where the child's told, don't eat the cookie. And like, if they don't eat the cookie, then we'll get 2 cookies. And you see the parent kind of walk away, or, they have a camera and they're watching to see, if the child's going to take the cookie. And it's usually the littler kid just goes for that cookie, maybe waits like 5 seconds. And then the older kid's like, no. And they're waiting for that reward.
Right, exactly. So at 2 years, expecting your child to wait longer than the 2 minutes without any sort of a distraction would be pretty difficult, just because of their sense of understanding time and their ability to self-regulate, understand that reward too.
So this is why therapists, we use visual timers or high interest toys, songs, and verbal cues just to aid in waiting, since, these skills are still developing. When does that wait time start to get longer?
At preschool age, children start to understand before versus after, and it's got to be in a familiar context and when like the word order aligns with the sequence of the events. So you're putting the word before in the sentence so that it actually happens 1 and then 2. So we'll go to the store before we go to school. They also start to recognize soon versus later, but again, they're not going to know like the minutes portion of that. So according to Friedman, preschoolers interpret, you said in 5 minutes, to be like, it's not going to happen now, but it will happen later, but they just don't know like how long that's going to be.
Okay, so even around that 3 to 4 years of age, your child will still have some difficulty understanding exactly what in 5 minutes or in 10 minutes would mean. They do understand some of those following directions concepts. So wash your hands before you eat lunch.
Yes. So takeaways are that at 2 years, children can really only wait like 60 to 120 seconds.
Wow.
Again, with distractions. So they definitely need some support at this age. And then at like 2.5 to 3 years, some children can stretch it to 3 to 5 minutes with support.
That was such a great speech spotlight, because I think it really shows parents and daycare providers how, our child's brain is working at this age and why these waiting tasks might be a little bit more difficult for them.
Yeah, it definitely puts it to perspective, like what we can expect and kind of how we can adjust to in order to set our child up for more success. So let's move on to our communication countdown. Back to our restaurants. What 5 toys are you bringing in your restaurant bag, Carrie?
I love this one. So 5 toys that I'm packing in my restaurant bag. The first one is just like a mini magnet tiles set. There's a bunch of them, but we have all these linked in our comments in our YouTube. But the magnet tiles micro set, it's just like those magnet tiles, but just a mini version, easy to carry on the go. I've seen these on Amazon. I've seen them in the Target dollar spot. I've seen them at Five Below. So those are awesome. You can build, be creative, very, interactive, and something you can just keep in that restaurant bag.
So easy.
Number 2, wooden puzzle pieces. Any, like small puzzles are great too, especially one that you might just like keep in your restaurant bag. Maybe it's restaurant themed, so it might be like fruits or vegetables or something like that. Just anything that's good for like a tabletop activity.
That's cute. I love that idea because you can even like pre-make your food that you're ordering.
Right. Yeah. Something like that. Cute. Number 3, drawing tablet. Anything that, sparks creativity, conversation is just easy to build on that. So this drawing tablet is super easy to just bring with you, and then you can just be creative, take turns. You can use it to help with your, creating a story, something like that.
No mess too. Always helps.
Mm-hmm. Next one I have, number 4 in our restaurant bag, is the puffy sticker book. This one is super cute. They're like just reusable little stickers. Same thing. You can build on this activity, create a story. You can also practice following directions with prepositions. So put under the hippo, put the hat on top of its head. Just a great time to practice some of those language skills if you're trying to take advantage of that time that you're all around the table together.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Number 5 is just a sensory activity board. These are so easy to throw in your restaurant bag. So they have things like zipping, buttoning, anything like that, opening, just some, different skills to practice while you're at the table, but also highly entertaining and interesting for those littles.
Yeah, those are always perfect. Great variety. Awesome. So that wraps up our chatter, our speech spotlight, and our communication countdown for the day. Let us know if you have any questions and if you also have suggestions on what we should chat about next.
Yeah, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.